The crack of breaking branches shattered the morning silence as Hunter Beau Calloway raised his rifle, finger hovering over the trigger. Through the scope's crosshairs, he expected to see the 8-point buck he'd been tracking for 3 days. Instead, a flash of torn burgundy fabric caught his eye, and his breath hitched. A woman barely more than a girl stumbled through the undergrowth. Her dark hair matted with leaves, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. "Jesus Christ," Beau whispered, lowering his weapon and breaking into a sprint. The girl collapsed. Just as he reached her, her knees buckling like a newborn fawn's. Up close, he could see the purple bruises blooming across her pale skin. The way her hands trembled as she tried to push herself upright. Her eyes the color of storm clouds fixed on his with a mixture of terror and defiance. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw as sandpaper. "Don't let him find me." Before Beau could ask who him was, the distant sound of baying hounds echoed. Through the Tennessee mountains, the girl's face went white as fresh snow, and she scrambled backward, wincing as thorns caught her already shredded dress. "Whoever you're running from," Beau said, scooping her up in his arms despite her weak protests, "they'll have to go through me first." He carried her to his stallion, Ranger, tethered nearby. The horse snorted nervously at the scent of fear and blood, but stood steady as Beau lifted the mysterious girl onto the saddle. As they rode hard toward his ranch, she pressed her face against his back, tears soaking through his flannel shirt. The Lazy Sea Ranch sprawled across 2,000 acres of prime grazing land, inherited from his grandfather. Beau's cabin sat, nestled against a backdrop of towering pines, smoke curling from the stone chimney. He'd built it with his own hands after returning from the war, needing solitude to heal wounds that went deeper than flesh. Inside, he settled her on his worn leather sofa, wrapping her in his grandmother's quilt. In the lamplight, he could see she was breathtaking, despite her battered state-high cheekbones. Full lips now split and swollen, and those incredible eyes that seemed to hold secrets darker than midnight. "What's your name, darlin'?" he asked, gently offering her a cup of hot coffee laced with whiskey. She hesitated, studying his face as if trying to determine whether he could be trusted. "Rachel," she finally whispered. "Rachel Nightingale?" "Well, Miss Rachel Nightingale," Beau said, settling into the chair across from her. "You want to tell me who's got you running scared through my woods?" Her hands tightened around the coffee. "Mug, my husband," she said, the word dripping with venom. "Silas Moorcock. He owns half the county. There's nowhere I can go that he won't find me." Beau leaned forward, his jaw tightening. He'd heard whispers about Moorcock, cattle baron with a taste for violence and a collection of judges in his pocket. "What did he do to you?" Rachel's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "What didn't he do? The bruises heal, but the cage he kept. Me in, ... double quotes. She trailed off, staring into the fire. "I was his pretty little bird meant to sing when he wanted and stay silent when he didn't." "Not anymore," Beau said with quiet conviction. "You're under my protection now." 3 days passed like a fevered dream. Rachel moved through Beau's cabin like a ghost, flinching at every shadow, every unexpected sound. She helped where she could, cooking meals with whatever supplies he had, mending his torn shirts with delicate stitches that spoke of a privileged upbringing. But mostly she watched the windows, waiting for the devil to come calling. Beau found himself studying her when she wasn't, looking, the way she hummed softly while kneading bread, the grace in her movements despite her injuries, the fire that flickered in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. She was healing, but not just physically. Something wild and beautiful was emerging from the broken shell of the woman he'd found in the woods. "You don't have to stay cooped up in here," he told her on the 4th morning, finding her pressed against the window, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "The ranch is safe. I've got hands posted at every entrance." She turned to him, and for the first time since he'd found her, she smiled. Not the brittle, practiced smile of a society wife, but something real and radiant that hit him like lightning. "Like that," she said. "I haven't seen open sky in, God, I can't remember how long." He took her on a tour of his domain, the sprawling pastures where his cattle grazed, the barn where his prize horses stamped and nickered, the creek that ran crystal clear from the mountain springs. Rachel absorbed it all with wonder, breathing deeply of the pine-scented air, laughing when a curious calf nuzzled her palm. "It's paradise," she said, as they sat by the creek, her bare feet dangling in the cool water. "How can you stand to leave?" I don't much," Beau admitted. "Got everything I need right here." He paused, then added quietly, "Almost everything." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Rachel looked away first, but not before he saw the longing there. The hunger for something she'd never been allowed to have. That evening, as they shared supper by the fire, she began to tell him about her life before Moorcock. She'd been born to a plantation family in Georgia, raised to be ornamental and obedient. Her father had sold her to Moorcock-like livestock, trading her beauty for business connections and political favors. "I tried to be what they wanted," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The perfect wife, the gracious hostess, but inside, I was dying a little more each day." Beau reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You're not dying anymore," he said. "You're living. Maybe for the first time." But their peace was shattered the next morning when Beau's foreman, Jeremiah Creek, rode up at a gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss," he called, swinging down from the saddle. "We got trouble coming. Moorcock's men were seen in Millerville yesterday, asking questions. Word is there, headed this way." Rachel went pale, her coffee mug clattering to the porch floor. "He found me," she whispered. "I should go. I can't let him hurt you because of me." Beau stood, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt .45 on his hip. "Nobody's going anywhere," he said, his voice hard as flint. "This is my land, and you're under my protection. Let Moorcock come. We'll be ready for him." Beau's ranch hands were men carved from the same hard timber as their boss Cowboys, who'd ridden with him through cattle drives and harsh winters, veterans who'd stood beside him in muddy trenches overseas. When word spread that trouble was coming, they rallied without question. Jeremiah Creek positioned riflemen in the barn loft and behind the corral fences. Tobias Ironwood, a half-Cherokee tracker, vanished into the woods to serve as their eyes and ears. Young Cody Silverstone, barely 18 but deadly with a six-shooter, took position on the cabin roof. Rachel watched the preparations with growing dread. "This is madness," she said, pacing the cabin floor like a caged panther. "Silas has 20 men, maybe more. I'll be killed because of me." Beau caught her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me, Rachel. I've seen evil in this world. Real evil that wears uniforms and hides behind flags. Your husband is just another bully who thinks money and fear make him untouchable. Well, he's about to learn different." "You don't understand," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's not just cruel, he's insane. He told me once that he'd burn down half the county before he'd let another man have me." "Then he's stupider than I thought," Beau said, pulling her against his chest. "'Cause nobody owns you, Rachel. Not him, not anybody." As night fell, they came. Tobias's owl call echoed through the darkness, 3 short hoots that meant riders approaching from the south. Extinguished the cabin lamps and moved to the window. Rachel pressed close behind him. Through the darkness, they could see torches. Bobbing like fireflies, at least a dozen men on horseback. Silas Moorcock rode at their head, unmistakable even in silhouette. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and bull-necked, with silver hair that gleamed in the torchlight. Even from a distance, his voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Oh, he bellowed, his words echoing off the mountain walls. "I know you're in there, and I know you have something that belongs to me. Send out my wife, and nobody has to die tonight." Beau opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch, his rifle cradled in his arms. "Evening, Moorcock," he called back, his voice calm as a Sunday sermon. "Funny thing about that, I don't see anybody here who belongs to you." Moorcock's laugh was like gravel in a tin can. "Don't play games with me, boy. Row that little wildcat. Cost me a fortune in bounty hunters before she ran to ground in your woods. Hand her over, and I might let you keep this pretty ranch of yours." "Here's a counteroffer," Beau said, taking a step forward. "You turn around, ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of, and pray I never see your face again." A silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Moorcock raised his hand, and his men spread out in a wide semicircle, surrounding the cabin. Rachel gripped Beau's arm, her nails digging into his flesh. "You should have taken my generous offer," Moorcock snarled. "Boys, burn it down. If the pretty bird won't come out of her nest, we'll smoke her out." Two of his men dismounted, pulling kerosene-soaked rags from their saddlebags. But before they could light them, Tobias Ironwood materialized from the shadows like death itself, his knife sliding between the first man's ribs before he even knew he was under attack. The second man spun, clawing for his gun, but Jeremiah's rifle cracked from the barn, and he crumpled to the ground. All hell broke loose as Moorcock's men returned fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the night like a deadly 4th of July. "Stay down," Beau shouted to Rachel, then kicked over a table for cover and began returning fire. His first shot took Moorcock's lieutenant clean off his horse. His second shattered another man's gun arm, but they were outnumbered, and Moorcock's men were pushing forward using their horses as shields. A bullet shattered the window behind Beau's head, spraying glass across the cabin floor. "This is it," he thought grimly, levering another round into his rifle's chamber. "At least Rachel will know somebody thought she was worth dying for." The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Smoke from gunpowder mixed with the acrid smell of spilled kerosene, creating a hellish fog that burned the eyes and throat. Beau's men fought like demons, but Moorcock's hired guns kept coming, using the darkness and their superior numbers to press closer to the cabin. Rachel crouched behind the overturned table, her hands pressed to her ears as bullets whined overhead. But as she watched Beau methodically work his rifle, his face calm despite the chaos around him, something inside her snapped. The helpless, frightened girl who'd stumbled through the woods was gone, replaced by something fierce and primal. She crawled to Beau's gun cabinet and pulled out his spare pistol, a nickel-plated Colt that felt surprisingly natural in her hands. Silas had never let her touch firearms, considering them too dangerous for his delicate flower. But before her marriage, her brother had taught her to shoot tin cans behind their family's plantation house. "Rachel, what are you?" Beau started to say, then ducked as another volley shattered what remained of the front windows. "I'm tired of hiding," she said, her voice steady as granite. "This is my fight too." She rose just enough to sight through the broken window and squeezed the trigger. Bullet caught one of Moorcock's men in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him tumbling from his horse. The second shot was even better, punching through another rider's hat and making him dive for cover behind a water trough. "God damn," Beau breathed, staring at her with new respect. "Where did you learn to shoot like that? A lady never tells," Rachel said with a grim smile, then gasped as she saw Moorcock himself dismounting, a torch in one hand and a shotgun in the other. "Beau, he's going for the barn." If Moorcock torched the barn, he'd not only destroy Beau's livelihood, but also flush out Jeremiah and the other men taking cover there. The battle would be over in minutes, and they'd all be dead. Beau made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he'd learned in the war. "Cover me," he told Rachel, then kicked open the cabin door and sprinted into the night. He made it halfway to the barn before Moorcock spotted him. The older man's shotgun boomed, buckshot chewing up the ground at Beau's feet, but he kept running. Moorcock cursed and broke open his weapon to reload, giving Beau the precious seconds he needed to close the distance. They collided like runaway trains, the impact sending both men sprawling. Moorcock was bigger and heavier, but Beau was younger, and fueled by a righteous fury that made him stronger than any man had a right to be. They rolled in the dirt, trading brutal punches, each trying to get his hands on the other's throat. "You bastard," Moorcock snarled, his fingers clawing at Beau's eyes. "She was mine first." "Mine." "She was never yours," Beau growled back, driving his fist into Moorcock's ribs with enough force to crack bone. "She's nobody's but her own." The fight might have gone on forever, but Rachel's voice cut through the melee like a church bell. "Silas." Both men froze, turning to see her standing 10 feet away, the Colt steady in her two-handed grip. In the flickering torchlight, she looked like an avenging angel, beautiful and terrible, and absolutely deadly. "It's over," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. Somehow, without anyone noticing, the gunfire had stopped. Moorcock's surviving men sat their horses uncertainly, caught between their employer's orders and the very real possibility of sudden death. Moorcock slowly got to his feet, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. "Won't pull that trigger, darling," he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone she'd heard 1,000 times before. "You're too soft, too gentle, too much of a lady." Rachel's smile was cold as winter moonlight. "You never knew me at all, did you, Silas? The woman you married, the one who smiled and nodded and never talked back, she died the day you put your hands on me. What you're looking at now is what you created." "Rachel, don't," Beau said quietly, pushing himself upright. "He's not worth the blood on your hands." For a moment she wavered, and Moorcock saw his chance. His hand dropped toward the derringer he kept in his boot, but Rachel saw the movement and made her choice. The Colt bucked in her hands, the shot echoing off the mountain walls like thunder. Silas Moorcock staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. Where Rachel's bullet had torn through muscle and bone, blood seeped between his fingers, black in the torchlight, but the wound wasn't fatal. Rachel had deliberately aimed wide, choosing mercy over vengeance, even in her moment of absolute power. "You little bitch," Moorcock gasped, his face contorted. "With pain and fury, you'll pay for this. I'll see you both dead, and I'll burn this whole valley too." "No," said a new voice from the darkness. "You won't." Sheriff Nathaniel Cross emerged from the shadows beyond the barn, his badge glinting in the firelight. Behind him came Deputy Marshal James Proudhorse and 6 federal agents, all with their weapons drawn. Beau blinked in surprise. He'd sent word to Cross days ago, but hadn't expected help to arrive so quickly. "Sheriff," Moorcock said, his voice taking on the confident tone of a man accustomed to buying his way out of trouble. "Thank God you're here. These people kidnapped my wife, and when I came to retrieve her—" "Shut up, Silas," Cross said wearily. "We've been investigating you for months. Cattle rustling, murder, bribery of federal officials. The only reason you've stayed out of prison is because every witness against you seemed to develop a sudden case of amnesia, ... or ended up dead." He nodded toward Rachel. "Until now, Mrs. Moorcocker? Should I say Miss Nightingale? Since we've discovered your marriage was never legally recorded, has been very forthcoming about your activities." Moorcock's face went white. "You can't prove anything. I have judges, senators had," Proudhorse corrected, producing a pair of iron shackles. "Amazing how quickly political friends disappear when the federal marshals come knocking. You're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, attempted murder, and about 15 other charges we'll think of on the way to Denver." As the lawmen secured their prisoner, Cross approached Beau and Rachel. "Sorry about the delay," he said. "We wanted to catch Moorcock in the act, make sure the charges would stick. Looks like you folks handled yourselves just fine without us." "What happens now?" Rachel asked, suddenly looking very young and very tired. "Now you're free," Cross said gently. "The marriage was a sham from the beginning. Moorcock was already wed to a woman in California who thought he was dead. Legally, you were never his wife, just another one of his victims." As Moorcock was loaded into a prison wagon, he turned back toward Rachel with eyes full of poison. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I've got friends you've never heard of. Money. You can't imagine. I'll get out. And when I do—" Rachel stepped forward, no longer the frightened girl who'd stumbled through the woods. "When you do," she said clearly, "I'll be waiting." The wagon rolled away into the darkness, taking with it the shadow that had haunted Rachel's life for so long. As the sound of wheels on gravel faded, an enormous silence settled over the ranch knot, the tense quiet of waiting for battle. But the peaceful hush of a storm finally passed. Beau's men began emerging from their positions, grinning and slapping each other on the back. Jeremiah pulled a bottle of whiskey from his saddlebags. Soon everyone was sharing drinks and retelling the night's events with the exaggerated bravado of men who'd cheated death and lived to boast about it. But Beau only had eyes for Rachel. She stood apart from the celebration, staring up at the stars that seemed impossibly bright after the smoke and chaos. When he approached, she turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispered, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "It's over," he confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "You're free, Rachel. Free to go anywhere, do anything, be anyone you want to be." She pulled back to look at him, her storm gray eyes searching his face. "What if what I want is to stay right here?" Beau's heart hammered against his ribs. "This is a hard life," he said carefully. "Ranching is brutal work, and I'm not exactly civilized company. You could have anything now, go back east, travel to Europe, marry some rich gentleman who'd treat you like a queen." Rachel's laugh was like silver bells. "I don't want to be treated like a queen," she said. "I want to be treated like an equal, like a partner. I want to work beside someone who respects my strength instead of trying to cage it. And if that someone happened to be a broken-down cowboy with more scars than sense, then I'd count myself the luckiest woman alive." 3 months later, the Lazy Sea Ranch had transformed from a bachelor's rough paradise into something approaching civilization. Rachel's touch was everywhere: curtains at the windows, flowers in mason jars on the kitchen table, a vegetable garden that was the envy of every ranch wife in 3 counties. But she hadn't gone soft. Each morning found her beside Beau in the saddle, checking fences and herding cattle with a skill that amazed the hands. She could rope a steer, break a mustang, and shoot the eye out of a playing card at 50 paces. The pampered plantation princess was gone forever, placed by a woman who'd found her true self in the mountains of Tennessee. Never seen anything like it. Jeremiah marveled to Tobias as they watched Rachel, gentle, a half-wild stallion that had been giving the men fits for weeks. Most women would run screaming from that devil horse. She talks to him like he's her best friend. "Some folks are just born to the wild," Tobias replied philosophically. Boss finally found himself a real partner. Beau had to agree. Working beside Rachel felt as natural as breathing. They moved together like they'd been doing it for years instead of months, anticipating each other's actions with an almost supernatural intuition. When a late spring blizzard trapped them in the high pastures for 3 days, they'd kept the cattle alive and each other warm with nothing but their wits and an unshakable trust. The physical attraction between them was a constant fire, but they'd been careful to take things slow. Rachel was still healing from years of abuse, and Beau was determined to let her set the pace. They slept in separate beds, shared chaste kisses goodnight, and pretended not to notice the way the air crackled with electricity every time they touched. But on a warm evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Rachel finally spoke the words that had been building between them for weeks. "I love you," she said simply, her hand finding his on the porch rail. "Not because you saved me, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because of who you are. The way you treat your animals with respect, the way you stand up for what's right even when it costs you, the way you make me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how." Beau turned to face her, his rough cowboy's hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "I love you too," he said. "More than I thought possible. You make me want to be better than I am." "You're already everything I need," Rachel whispered. And then his lips found hers, and there was no more need for words. That night, the first time since he'd found her bleeding in the woods, Rachel didn't retreat to the spare bedroom. Instead, she took Beau's hand and led him to the bed they would share for the rest of their lives. Their love-making was everything the marriage bed with Moorcock had never been tender and passionate. Equal, parts giving and taking. Where Moorcock had demanded and taken, Beau asked and offered. Where she had once submitted out of fear, she now participated out of joy. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets with the mountain breeze cooling their fevered skin, Rachel traced lazy circles on Beau's chest and marveled at the turn her life had taken. "A year ago, I never could have imagined this," she said. "I thought I was destined to be a caged bird forever. And now," Beau asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "now I know what it means to fly." 2 weeks later, Beau rode into town to buy supplies and returned with something extra simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. That evening, as they sat by the creek where they'd first begun to know each other, he dropped to one knee in the wildflowers. "I know we don't need a piece of paper to make this real," he said, his voice rough with emotion. but I want the whole world to know that you chose me, and I chose you, and that choice is for keeps." Rachel's answer was lost in tears and laughter. But when she slipped the ring onto her finger, Beau knew he had his yes. The wedding was held at the ranch on a golden September morning, with the whole valley in attendance. Rachel wore a simple, white dress she'd sewn herself, decorated with wildflowers from the mountain meadows. Beau had traded his work clothes for a black suit that made him look like the frontier gentleman he'd always been at heart. Sheriff Cross performed the ceremony. Under an arch of aspen branches, his usually stern face soft with genuine affection for the couple who'd overcome so much to find each other. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd when they exchanged vows they'd written themselves. It's promising not just love and honor, but partnership and equality, trust and respect. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Tennessee," Cross intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Beau, you may kiss your bride." And kiss her he did, to the cheers and whistles of every cowhand neighbor, friend who'd gathered to celebrate their happiness. The party that followed lasted well into the night, with fiddle music and dancing, enough food to feed an army, and stories that would be told around winter fires for years to come, as the guests finally began to drift away. Rachel and Beau found themselves alone on their porch, swaying gently to music only they could hear. The ring on Rachel's finger caught the starlight, but it was the light in her eyes that took Beau's breath away. "Any regrets?" he asked, half joking, but needing to hear her answer.